rules. So, is that quite okay? Where is our lady
She's
who
coming.
looks after?
She's just
Yes,
coming.
yes.
We can just bring her back.
Yeah. Yeah, is this a good place? Hello everyone.
Hello.
So good to see familiar and new faces as well. So welcome to everyone.
Come on, guys.
So we actually
Yeah, we're going to do this little different.
we're gonna do it a little different.
Okay.
Okay.
As long as you still got your camera reels going, so as documentation. So, hi. Tasleem and I just met last night for the first time.
Wow.
And we felt we had a lot of things in common, so we decided to do this a little differently. So bear with us, because we're still discovering each other, but I had a lot of curious questions for her. I think we'll start with introducing each other. So my name is Minku Butter, and I think I'm the perfect cross-culture prodigy. Yeah, my accent sounds like it could be a jambalaya from New Orleans to Bahasa in Malaysia. I grew up living in 8 cities in India, and between 2000 till 2005 I lived in 9 countries overseas. So if there was something called global citizen passport, I should have had it. And in fact, if we had that passport in the world, I think most of the world's descent would be taken care of. I might not have the passport, but I do lay claim to the palate, which is also one of our topics for food festivals, films and fashion, and how they bring the culture together. So I grew up eating dal bhati churma from Rajasthan, to the spiciest curry fish dishes or orisa, to Unu Causeway of Burma, living in Burma, to the arepas of Venezuela. So I lived there. 2005 I came back and I sprung into my profession now, which is a fashion designer and an artist. I MC programs, I'm a social activist, a community influencer. This is just like a new term. I guess if you do something good out of goodness of your heart, and you're trying to get cultures together, empower women, then you become an influencer of the community, and then you have people reaching out to you all the time. So the one thing that came to me strongly as I was growing up, I was always guided by my parents to not only ingest all those food and work on my palate, but also to keep in mind the psyche of people, the attitudes of people that make them. Okay, so I would say now I still travel 10 times a year, and that probably makes me very cross-culture tolerant. Okay, so that's pretty much me. Over to Tasleem Somji to introduce herself.
Sure. So I also have maybe not lived in as many countries, but I've been to as many countries. I spent most of my life traveling and working in the art scene. My family's originally from Kutch in Gujarat, but I was born in Canada and grew up there. And in 2004 I moved to Dubai and lived there for 5 years. And then after that I was working for the film festival. I was part of the team that was actually part of an international team that was actually recruited from different film institutions around the world that were brought together to actually start the first cultural event in the Gulf region, which was the Dubai Film Festival. Now there's 3 film institutes, there's about 7 film festivals, there's lots of there's Art Dubai, there's lots of cultural activity happening in the Middle East. But at that time, because of censorship and a lot of the traditional ways in which the country evolved, there wasn't a lot of that in the beginning. So I lived there, and then after that I worked as a film consultant, and I used to travel to film festivals around the world, so I would spend a few months in France and work for Cannes, and go to Australia and go to the States. So I have been pretty much everywhere and lived.
Sounds very glamorous.
Yes.
Totally glamorous.
Except we're not on the red red carpet side where we're always walking, we're behind the scenes working.
Yes, I was just going to say, if you need a designer to do your lockdowns, I'm there.
Absolutely, absolutely. See, this is exactly how synergy happens. So that was predominantly where I started traveling and working with different cultures and looking at arts and culture from these different places in the world and how they are expressed through the artists and the communities that live there, through the different work that they do, through their food, through their style of dress, which I found to be really, really inspiring and really interesting, and allowed someone who was essentially a foreigner to actually feel right at home in many of these places, especially when you were going for long periods of time. I came back to Toronto in 2010. I actually moved to Vancouver to work for the Olympics because they were in Canada that year, and I worked on the cultural program. The Winter Olympics, yeah. And I worked on the cultural program. So during the day they had all the sports games, and in the evenings they had concerts and activities and all kinds of programs, which was really great to kind of look at what Canadian culture was. And for me, this is the most interesting part of it because, you know, when you look at a country like India and you have all of this incredible diversity within the country itself, looking at you know, the different regions and the regional dialects and the regional foods, and there's all this diversity in one country that lives together.
22 languages, 720 dialects in India. That's what we have. It's unbelievable.
And I don't think there's another country like that.
There is
in
none.
the world.
There is none. True democracy.
And you live together as one. And when we, you know, from abroad, the perspective is that it is all one. It is India. On the flip side, in Canada, people who live there don't know what Canadian culture is, because how do you define it when the country itself is so new? It's 152 years old. There are your natives, your aboriginals, there's your French culture, and then everybody else is an amalgamation of the country in which they live.
Yes. I just want to stop you for a bit. Are we loud enough? Of course, you can hear us. You're good with. Do we need to be louder?
Yeah, because we're not mic'd. Is that okay?
Okay.
You need to be louder this week because we.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I thought it was fine. So,
I have a soft voice and I have a cold as well.
So can you imagine she's like a fireball, very silently doing all that magnanimous magnitude of work there behind the scenes. So my takeaway there, Tasleem, is for me, I think it'd be really nice for all of us to have a concept of what is culture, okay, and what's common and we talked this morning about diversity. We've been talking about cultures and diversity because cultures bring it together, and yet they have a common stream, but then people are so diverse, the languages are diverse. So I think it's a beautiful synergy here. So for me, culture would also be a pattern of activity. Do you agree? Food, how they intake, ingest, in festivals, what they celebrate, films, what they celebrate and showcase to the whole world, and of course fashion. So architecture, what about, and it also brings around a dialogue, okay, of political intentions, social intentions, and history. And of course, it goes into uncharted territory sometimes, but that's the fun part of it. And it is actually, you know, there's a very interesting word called proxemics, which is, you know, how we are such, I think, not blindfolded, but we do have fad words, we have trending words, don't we? So proxemics is a very trending word. Just like a cultural strategist.
Yes.
She's been called a cultural strategist, which we were both having a laugh and saying, that's such a mouthful and sounds beautiful. So proxemics by Edward Hall is actually the distance that two people who are having a conversation keep from each other. So next time you're having a conversation within your cultures, again the diverse culture of India, or you're having a conversation with someone else from another culture. We were sitting knee last night, right? But sometimes you have this standoffishness where you're keeping a little reserve. So that proxy mix, as it's called, actually either makes cultures or it breaks. It either brings down barriers or actually it creates mayhem. And as we all know, the breakdown of this communication is really what tears nations apart, right? So the communication, the proxemics, please be very aware. Okay, we are empowered women. We're always talking about empowering ourselves through all those medias. So, feel comfortable with the proximity of someone.
And I think actually, food, fashion, film, these are ways that make these cultures make each other accessible in ways that we don't, where we don't know how to interact or how to engage with someone. These are the ways in which we do actually bring them together, because we can share a common taste for food or a common style of clothing or a color that we appreciate, and they make them much more easier for us to connect with each other as individuals, because they don't seem like important things. They seem like a meal, a dress. They don't seem like they're important, yet they are.
Actually, these are the four, if you start doing a little bit of research, which I'm sure we all do, these are the four fundamental things that bring cultures together. Literally. Yeah? Talking about different cultures, I'll give you a very, very quick example. We talk about individualistic cultures, say, in America. And I take America as a live example. When a child is growing up, it's always about, let them take the decision. Okay, and when they grow up and they're successful, they say this child is successful because of their own hard work. Whereas what happens in an extreme culture like Japan is called collectivism, where the family is so involved and any success is dedicated back to the family. So you have that spectrum of cultures here. I think we can start by dissecting each of these elements. I think that's the best way to do it, and then we see what connectivity from your perspective and mine. When we talk about food, it's literally how we live. It's not about what we ingest. It's literally that. Food also, I feel, it satisfies your hunger and your soul. Literally. They always say if you want a good husband in India, they say make sure you feed him well, and the way to the heart is through the stomach. For all of you who are not married here. Okay.
Also, Minku, if you feed somebody, at the end of it, they say Triptos me.
Oh yes, and it's also the
get
karma.
all the blessings.
Yes, in India and all always comes from that. And in fact, a lot of different parts of the world. My daughter spent 6 months in Central America feeding people, clothing people, and I tell you that gratification that you get from feeding. They say you can't even meditate if you're hungry. So imagine how food is linked to our souls.
And I think that, it is very much an Indian tradition to be the hospitable, exactly, very warm, bringing in to feed people, and that is our way of showing affection. But I think what's interesting is that it actually is a very common thread in many cultures and in many homes. It is a way that people show appreciation, show affection, show welcome, show generosity. The way that they can do that, especially when you don't have anything to give, is to give of yourself and to give of your food. And it's the most inviting way that people
bond together.
That's right.
So I read about, and this you would be able to relate, about the Francophone festival. Okay, and this is an amazing festival, and this is really, the one thing I wanted to mention earlier, the reason why we get together in these symposiums and conferences together at DEF, is it's an exchange of ideas. It's not really to come here and look glorious. Okay, it is your own responsibility to share knowledge and to see what is the takeaway from your audience. Okay, and that's why for me personally, I do a lot of research on every topic. And basically, because I'm learning. And what I learn, I can share. And that's the mantra that I live with. So have you heard of or anyone heard about the Francophone festival in New Orleans? Yeah?
It's a food festival.
It's a food. So here we have food and festival. There comes the first link. They have actually 20 French-speaking nations. So we're getting very global. Okay, anything that happens in the US, we've talked about this. We have this, we have this feeling that, oh, why is it all Hollywood and why is it all America? That's because it's always been there. It's huge, and then you'll give your perspective in a bit.
Absolutely.
Of why. So these 20 French-speaking nations come together, and can you imagine you have the jambalaya from New Orleans, and then you have the Swiss chocolates, and then you have the tabalaya in Morocco. So it's such an amazing amalgamation. And also, I would like to say, Leslie, how the shift is happening.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, if we go back to sort of the definition of what culture is, for me, it's heritage. That's what culture is. It's our past. Culture is our window into who we were, and how to preserve that, how to remember that, how to cherish that, and then how to take it forward to our future. And so if we think about culture from that perspective, and then we look at food. So even an example like jambalaya is a fusion. And this is another one of those buzzwords right now.
I think all working empowered women should learn how to do a jambalaya, because you throw everything that you can think of into one single dish. That's the jambalaya for you.
Absolutely.
That's what
Khichdi.
That's true. But it is it's an amalgamation of cultures that came together to create a new dish. Creole, for example, and then traditional French cuisine together. Fusion in itself in food is the biggest trend right now. How do we bring all of these cultures together through food? So we create these, even here in India, we look at all these fusion dishes, right? Hakka itself is a fusion of Indian and Chinese food. So already within the dish itself, or within cuisine itself, there's already a blend of cultures. We see these different parts of the world coming together just through the experimentation of spices and ingredients and recipes that people are creating on their own.
So I think festivals for me does that for me, because if you look at festivals, how are they celebrated? How did they emerge? They were always something that is centered around either the birth of founders of religion, right? Or say agriculture. Harvest time. Harvest time is a lot of festivals are celebrated around harvest times.
What I was going to say was, I think festivals, from my perspective, actually they transcend all three of these topics, or all three of these other F words here, because anything can be a festival. We talked about this yesterday as well, about what this idea of a festival actually is, and how the traditional definition of what a festival is may not necessarily apply anymore. But I think what's interesting about festivals is that it allows us to not only sample these other cultures that we may not, may not know how to do on our own, but it allows us to do them together, it allows us to do them in groups, and then what it's doing is not just giving an invitation or giving a window into a different culture, it's actually bringing communities together. So now you're celebrating that diversity by making it inclusive, and I think that's the most important thing that a festival can do, regardless of whether it's for food, for fashion, for film, for visual arts, for any kind of, it could be for anything outside of the arts
It's
sector.
a food festival or a film festival, and that's how they are two grouped together. They're not that far. So any celebration where there's inclusivity becomes a festival. Now the one festival that really took my attention was the Inspired Food Festival, just to see and show how the shift of the mindset is happening. So forever, Valentine's has been about posh restaurants. But this year, on the 14th of February of 2019, few hundred people took their chairs and got together to witness the Inspire Food Festival. It's a film and food festival in Texas, where they showed funny movies like The Pickle. It was living in a death of pets. Then they showed For the Love of Mary, which was a 97-year-old man who was celebrating running and loss of his wife. Then fashion came in because there is this foundation called HEN, H-E-N, and they came up with very special fashion on some of those films, which was made of plastic bottles and pack of cards. Okay, so that was inspiring, and so there is a mind shift of people happening here. Would you be able to, Taslim, name a few other film festivals around the world?
Sure. I mean, there's, they are the main big film festivals that everybody knows about. There's Cannes in France. There's TIFF in Toronto, which is one of the biggest. There are film festivals. That's right. Yeah. Even here in India, we've got the International Film Festival in Goa, which is a large film festival and a very important film festival for Indian cinema. There's so many festivals out there, and I think what's interesting about those ones and the reasons why they're so big is not just where they're located, but because they look at a vast amount of films and looking at a vast amount of themes. So countries, different themes, different genres, that's what makes them big and popular, and because they're accessible to the public. So they become festivals in that sense because you don't have to work in the industry. You can go just to enjoy them. But what's also really interesting, and this is something that's happened over the last 10 years in Toronto, is that there have been a number of small festivals that have popped up specifically to celebrate a particular region, a particular genre. So there is a food film festival, there is a fashion and film festival, there is a horror film festival, there is a French film festival, there's a sports film festival. This idea of looking at a theme and bringing people together for people who want to learn more about a particular type, or who are generally more interested in that allows them to come together, to watch together, to learn about it, to talk about it, and then to meet other people who are interested in the same
I
thing.
think it's also an interaction ground
That's right.
of various nations coming together. On that note, can anyone here tell me a few of the top celebrated festivals per se, of the world where maximum number of people take care, not even film festivals, celebrations? Would you believe Holi?
Yeah.
Holi is actually celebrated by the maximum number of people in the world. The other one is the Winter Light Festival.
Yes.
Also, Winter Light Festival.
The
Also,
Woodstock Festival, have you heard about it?
which one?
The Woodstock Festival.
The Woodstock Festival, and also the Cherry Blossom
Yes,
Yes.
of
it's going
Japan,
on.
which
It's
is
going on right now.
absolutely. So this is where loads and loads, millions of people, like when you have the snow sculpturing in Japan, millions of people come together from all over the world. So what?
And there's also Carnival, which is
Carnival,
which is a
yeah.
celebration of
We
the
should not miss out
Yeah,
on
festival.
music
Yeah.
because that's one thing which brings everybody together.
Exactly.
So-
Exactly. It's not limited to these
We
three.
also talked about Taslim why, and this is very important, and I'm sure all of you have asked this of yourselves sooner or later, is why is everything, when you start researching, everything takes you back to Hollywood. Of course there's Hollywood and Nollywood and Bollywood, but everything. I found the answer since last night, okay? And I just feel, even if you talk about the French, there's a new genre, and I'm very, very proud to say there's a new genre of female film directors coming up,
Yes.
okay? And that, I think, is great eclogue to the women empowerment things. So there has been, of course, films that changed with chronological time of history. Like in the early 1900s, and you will agree with me, there were always the urbanization was happening, the industrialization was happening, right? There was a migration from the rural to the urban areas. So the tastes, desires were very much dependent on films and media. Television was just introduced. So people were aping. For example, the Flashdance movie, and the leg warmers, the toned jeans came into fashion. So I think there's a lot of, and then in the early 2000s, and I say this, and you would probably know much more about the history, but for me it's fascinating, is in the 2000s, there was these movies about depending on what was happening in the world. For example, the nasty farming practices. Movies was made on that. or the negativity of eating junk food, right? Food for me. Or what about the Columbine, yes, Super Size Me, thank you. And the school shootings, the Columbine school shooting. Then there was movies about bringing awareness. So these movies, because I think Hollywood has a bigger reach, okay, they have bigger budgets. So inevitably, am I right in saying that that's why people keep going back to Hollywood for fame and what have you?
I think that's part of it. I think budget has to do with it. I also think that it's the reach of the West, and it's the perspective of the media that we're always getting on this side of the world. And actually, even within Canada, we don't hear a lot about what's happening in the rest of the world unless you're looking for it. And that's not just because of our proximity to the States. It's because for a long time they became the standard for film, for entertainment, and so they've held that reputation for so long that they've become a source, regardless of whether they want to or not. And it's something that we go to as an authority because we know that they have been working in the field, in the industry for so long, and so we trust that opinion.
I think
Yes,
also
I think
it's
you
not
trust the
it's not
opinion.
just about the length of time. I think it's also the kind of stories that they're showcasing out in the world. They're really amazing and very relatable for the audience to watch. I
But
mean,
some-
Bollywood, although we love our drama and
Yeah,
everything, I also think Hollywood is extremely realistic in terms of the audience
But
space
I
that it
have
reaches out
this
to.
to tell you, Nikita, that actually speaking the game changers, because you were doing a whole change of mindsets.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Isn't that what you're doing with
Yes,
films?
absolutely.
It's not entertainment anymore.
Exactly.
So you would be very surprised that some of the top movies in these award winner movies
Yes.
are actually non-American directors.
Yes, yes,
Right?
that's true.
So it just becomes a platform of where
To get
and
better
I think
art.
that's the most important thing. Is that
and why
it is-
disturb the apple cart?
And that's it, exactly.
Still a we. I mean,
That's
seriously.
right. But I think, to your point, it is just a platform, and I think it's unfortunate because there are so many more stories that are being told around the world that
Yes.
are never being noticed. And that's where festivals become important, especially for film, because they get a platform that they don't otherwise get.
Yes.
And they disappear after that because
Exactly.
they don't have the big budgets, they don't have the name talent, they don't have the support behind them, and some of those stories, I will tell you, are better, and we will never see them.
And I think the women directors to watch out. I just want to touch briefly on the Indian directors that are taking the world by storm. They're talking about lesbians, they're talking about honor killings, they're talking, the movies by Meera Nair, Fire, Water. I mean, what
Deepa
powerful
Mehta.
movies, Deepa Mehta's. There is one particular emerging director that you should all watch out for. Her name is Haifa Ali Mansoor. She has created movies. There's the movie Girl in the River, where they've talked about honor killings. Okay? And a movie I watched last week, which was Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a new movie, relatively, last year, but it talks about lesbianism. These are Indian directors who are talking about social taboo projects. So I think a film apes, films ape culture and vice versa. Okay?
So I think, from a film perspective or from an entertainment perspective, as we were talking about, books were actually our first window into other culture.
Yes.
Initially.
Initially, it was
media came in.
absolutely. People wrote about their own experiences. People wrote about experiences that they longed for, and that's where our stories came from. They wrote about these myths, the things that we grew up with, the things that our ancestors told us about. Those stories, those became our first windows into other cultures, into other identities. Then we started making those into, as technology evolved, we started making those into movies. But I think what's most important about film is that regardless of the story that's being told, whether it's a documentary, whether it's a short film, whether it's an animated film, at any given point, each film is a representation of the time and the culture it represents. And it is the only art form that's living proof of an archive of our history around the world. Every country, every film, every story that's being put on film is not only a living archive of who we were as a people, as a community, as a society at the time. It is a living documentation of the food that was being eaten, of the style of dress, of the conversation, the way that people spoke. You know, if you look at some of the older films, the British films, and the way that they spoke, and some of the more contemporary British films that are being made now, the language is the same, but how they spoke has evolved, how we dressed has evolved. So I think, and that, you know, when we get to fashion, that's something I would like to ask you about as well, because food and film become very easily accessible for us to share in each other's experiences, for us to bring cultures together, because there are a window for us to see and to taste, which is very tangible. Fashion
And
is
stay with it.
and stay with
Stay
it.
with it.
I would like to add something before you go into fashion. You would agree that films earlier, what I noticed is that if you wanted to direct a film, you had to be 30 years, 40 years, you need to have that experience. But now, like at festivals, younger age kids, 18, 19, 20,
Yeah.
easily
Yeah.
just
You know what?
go
So
ahead.
there is actually a dating app.
Yeah.
It's called a speed dating.
Yeah.
Okay, a speed dating app actually gives the opportunities to very new fashion designers to link with their peers or directors, emerging directors to link with their peers.
Yes, so that comes for all. I think like because of the digital media, not just for food, like for
Yeah.
people who are
For
good with their,
everyone.
you know,
Yeah.
someone is a good chef, someone may be good at film, someone is organizing a festival and wants people to come, someone's a designer. I think that age barrier,
Yeah,
has
you know,
broken.
this is the new genre is
Yeah.
the platform is available for anyone who has a message.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are very accepting now.
This is the evolution of digital media.
And it's not just for men. Like earlier it was man dominated, but like it's
Absolutely,
like
yeah,
age
yeah,
barrier
yeah,
is gone.
yeah.
The like females are a part of everything
That's
now.
what I said, that
People are
these
encouraging.
directors. So I think we will take this back, before we run out of time, back to the last fashion, which is very, very close to my heart as a fashion director. And for me, if you look back at time, cultures have always dressed themselves, okay? In fact, the plenary that I will be talking about on the 15th is, my topic there is realigning oneness with your personal style quotient. Okay, it's a powerful topic, and I find that for ages, if you look back at time, different cultures have always dressed themselves. Okay, they've covered themselves. That was the term, whether they were just doing body painting or whether they do just tattooing. So there was some form of dressing. Okay, it's come to a point where we are so aware. And when you start concentrating on a fad, it becomes a style statement and a style quotient. Okay, and it becomes fashion. When you start dressing up better, and that's what fashionable is. Now, there is also a very cute thing that I always remember. Just wearing something is dressing up. So Marilyn Monroe, the ever-known iconic legend, she just said, for me, dressing up is wearing Chanel 5 to bed. So I thought that was very cute. So when you're wearing something, we think it's clothing yourself, but actually wearing. So fashion statements.
So what I wanted to ask you was, how do we, you know, we've talked about how we use food, you know, to bring people together, how we use film as a way of introducing people or giving them a window into another culture, another time, a period of time. How do we do that with fashion in a way that doesn't make it feel culturally inappropriate, doesn't make it feel like we're treating clothing as a costume? How do we do that allows people to feel like they're sharing in another's culture by embracing the style of dress, the fabrics, the patterns, the designs, and yet not feel like we are misappropriating?
So I would say the biggest connector in fashion industry is globalization. Just for the sheer joy and pleasure that dressing up gives. For example, you find the biggest consumer of Versace is actually the Middle Eastern women, and they are wearing this embellished stuff under the burqas. Okay, and then again, if you look back in time, what in World War II gave the greatest pleasure to a woman is a simple lipstick. Okay, so you see how pleasurable and how joyful fashion can be. Cancer hospitals today just going and dressing them up in different headgear because they lose their hair or wigs. okay, or makeovers. These become a thing. So I think because of media, Tasleen, there is actually no limits. There is no diversification to the point of unification, I would say, because anyone sitting in any country can look up what the fashion. Like for example, me, I'm sitting in India, but I'm already working on the color schemes. We are in summer now, but I'm already doing winter.
Yeah.
So anyone who's in the fashion industry
Yeah.
will understand that. So just as we aid the designers and we want to be seen in the best in, if you are into that. I always say it's not necessary, no matter which part, which culture you come from, to be able to aid someone. End of the day, you might just go somewhere and buy a branded stuff, but end of the day, it'll have to be your personal style quotient that is going to be, for example, Lakshmi. This is who Lakshmi is, because she's going to walk and what she wears with flair. Now, also some designers talking about cross cultures. Yeah. How some designers are very influenced. So culture-wise, there was the high culture, the middle culture, and the pop culture. That's what fashion has gone through. So some designers have been very influenced. For example, I would say monogram bags by Louis Vuitton. There was this Takashami, the very remotely sitting in Japan somewhere, this artist who ended up making a line of Louis Vuitton bags. Or you had the dancing girls, Japanese dancing girls that Stefani came up with, the singer came up with her line. So I think globally, anyone can wear anything. It is not representing a particular culture anymore. The burqas, again, have become so fashionable.
Look at
What about saris?
saris.
I want to
Saris,
ask
yes.
both of y'all, like,
Yeah, 1 minute, I'll take, yeah.
Sorry, regarding saris, if you allow me to say.
Yes, please.
Every time I.
Could you be louder so that
Which
the
needs a
question
mic.
can be heard? Not,
I can go there.
She's comfortable with that mic. Very briefly.
So, very briefly, yes, regarding saris,
Yeah.
every year when I visit India, I always wear saris. Why is that? This is to show my respect to India,
Absolutely.
to show respect to the women of India and to the culture. Myself as a foreigner or as a tourist here, I miss literally to see the Indian women on their lovely, gorgeous, breathtaking saris. I think what I'm seeing in the streets, the sari, sadly for me, is losing it. I see a lot.
It's not losing it, it's just that there is a conversion happening on the styling of saris.
Yeah.
So you could be wearing a sari, which is like in between a kaftan, or a frilly meringue dress.
It's the new
Okay.
style
It's
of Indian dress
It's
with
just
you've got to buy
the
different
style
Indian
statements
styles.
are, so when it talks about the rural people, Carla,
Yeah.
not Kala, I remember, it is, we all are evolving, right? We're evolving. So when you evolve, anything that becomes in remission or idle also changes, okay?
And that's why fashion goes through trends,
Yeah.
and why food goes through trends, and
But-
why films go through trends, because things
We're
come and then they become
experimenting
popular,
now.
and then they go away, and then they come back in a different form. We're always reinventing the wheel, whichever we're doing, and that's what's the most interesting thing about it.
But Carla, the answer to your question is when you come as someone who's visiting India, you are just seeing the urban population,
Yeah.
right? So when you go up, India is the major chunk are still staying in the rural areas. You will see pretty much what someone wore 50 years ago. They're still wearing the same styles. Rajasthan, the way they drain has not changed. The colors have not changed. It is just again globalization. It's an access to media. So look at our point of view. When we wear a dress or we wear pants, like what I'm wearing today is a fusion, right? It's not an Indian. So the word fusion is the trending word now. You all agree? Yeah. Also, I think for an Indian woman, wearing pants and skirts is probably, this is just my viewpoint, also a point of showing I'm emancipated. That I can fit, I can fit into anywhere in the world. Because now I'm modern. I do not have to adhere to what my grandmothers did.
And yet there's also empowerment in tradition.
Yes.
Can I add, sorry, can I add, if you might have heard, at least my grandparents say, that these kids, these new age kids have been, influenced by the Western culture, but I feel like we are also influencing, other areas. Sabyasachi, when he linked up all these foreigners, Beyonce was wearing an Indian outfit and she's so proud of it. Kim Kardashian has been wearing all the jewelry, so it's not just us getting influenced, but we are influencing.
No, but again, why is that?
Yeah.
Why is that? Tell me, why is that happening?
Because
end of the
diversity,
day,
everyone wants, because people started accepting like the colors.
No, it's not just that. It's also the fact that it's an exchange of ideas. Okay, it's the wanting a new thing, a novelty.
So it comes
It's
with
also the
exception.
novelty. Okay, so exactly. So it's a beautiful thing.
So just for me to myself to go, I love saris. When I come here in India, my luggage is basically empty. When I go back, I always have to pay fines. It's a saris and lehengas. Only saris and lehengas. In my business in the Netherlands, once a year I do competition of saris with my clients.
All the best. I also want to tell you on that note that back in Bangalore, I make it a point as something that I'm very proud of my culture, mind you. We're just finishing. I make it a point that once a year I do sari draping for all the expatriates because I'm a member of the Overseas Women Club. So we do sari draping for everyone once a year is the Indian night. So at that note, we'd like to finish this session. Yes, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for being part of this. I hope there are some takeaways. It was a pleasure to do research on it, exchange ideas, and also have lovely inputs from all of you. You have a fantastic day today. Thank you.
And if anyone's interested in learning more, I mean, there's many talks. I know that he's doing one about Style Quotient. I'm doing one on Sunday at 5, just looking at how we use arts and culture to build more inclusivity and to make it better.
When is that?
That's on Sunday at 5.
I shall be there. Let's get a nice cozy picture. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, basically.
Leaving.